Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the Planning Commission hearing, March 27, 2023. We are going to get started. We will open with our Pledge of Allegiance. So if you would, please. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, we are going to go to our first consent item. We have draft minutes for February 13th, 2023. Hopefully you've all had a chance to look those over. Any discussion on the minutes? If not, the chair will entertain a motion.
I move to approve the minutes of February 23rd, 2023.
I'll second.
It's been approved, moved and seconded. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Aye.
Those opposed? Passes 4-0. And we are good to go there. We are going to now move to citizen input on non-agenda items. I see no citizens in the room, and do we have anybody online, Lainey? Nobody online, so we are going to just jump right on to new business, which we have none of. And we will go to public hearing. Tonight we're going to be hearing the Economic Opportunity Analysis, the EOA, going to be presented by our Planning Staff Director, Don Hardy. And before we get into that, being that this is a quasi-judicial, I always love that, excuse me, legislative matter, I will go ahead just for the sake of it and read the format. Tonight there is a matter before the hearing body that requires a public hearing. All interested persons in attendance shall be heard on these matters. If you wish to testify on these matters, please feel free to fill out a public testimony card and give it to the recording secretary. When your name is called, please step forward to the microphone at the front of the front table, state your name, your address, and interest in the matter. For longer presentations, proponents and opponents may buy time from one another. In doing so, those either in favor or opposed may allocate their time to a spokesperson who will represent the entire group. All questions will be directed through the chair. Any evidence to be considered must be submitted to the hearing body for public access. All written testimony received both for and against shall be summarized by staff and presented briefly to the hearing body during the staff report. The public hearing will be conducted as follows. Staff will have 5 minutes. Questions? Chair will open the public hearing for testimony. Applicant 20 minutes, proponents 3 minutes, opponents 3 minutes, rebuttal 10 minutes. The chair will then close the public hearing. Questions, if any, by the hearing body. Discussion by the hearing body. A decision shall be made by the hearing body at the close of the hearing on each matter, or it will be continued to a date certain in the future. This will be the only notice of that date you will receive. Does anyone have any questions for the procedure of the public hearing? We have no questions. We will move on to Mr. Hardy. If you will present for us, please.
Thank you. Good evening, Commissioners. Tonight we'll be discussing the economic opportunity assessment work that's been completed to date and the recommendations that have come forth with that process. We have Todd Chase from FCS Group, who's also on Zoom. He's our lead economist that helped us put all this together. He's here to answer any specific questions. I'll lead the presentation. I'm going to keep it rather brief and high level, and we can dive deeper into this. I think just as an overview tonight, we're seeking really two things from the commissioners: a recommendation to council, specifically regarding the growth rate that is for the medium, low, medium, or high growth rate, and we're going to talk about that tonight for employment. Second part of that is looking at the objectives for what's come out of the work to date, including the advisory committee, a number of work sessions, a number of surveys that have happened. If there are additions or items that you feel should be either added or modified, we will take that input and advance that to the council. And then the council will hear that on April 19. So I'm going to go ahead and move forward here, and this can be rather interactive. And so if you have questions as we go, I don't want this to be where I have to go through the whole thing. If there's information you would like to have. And then also in your packets, there was a full economic opportunity analysis report, which has a lot of detail in it. I tried to summarize the high levels of that in the staff report, which is also in your packets. And this PowerPoint is even more of an abbreviation of the staff report. So just starting maybe more high level here, again, there was a grant from the Department of Land Conservation and Development that the city received. And the city, part of that grant process is we need to wrap up the city approval process with our council by May 2023 per the grant requirements. We are on schedule for that. And this is just the project schedule again, kind of where we're at tonight, towards the bottom here. And there's been other other work sessions and other public activities, but this is a summary slide here. So tonight we'll be going through the Planning Commission, and then council will hear this on April 19. So just in terms of high level of like, why are we here? What's the purpose of this process? And really, there's a number of these elements that are important. One is identifying the land base to accommodate forecasted jobs. So this wasn't done in a vacuum, but FCS did a very thorough buildable lands analysis pursuant to the state requirements for buildable lands within the state of Oregon. And that information is really critical to looking at what additional land may be needed, and those would relate to establishing target growth rates for employment. Looking at things, we'll get into that in a bit here, but looking at things from the low end to the medium to the high end of growth rates. Those are how those are looked at. The other part of this is looking at identifying the economic assessment as part of the economic chapter of the comprehensive plan and transportation system plan updates, which are in process. And this information, especially the objectives, will be important as we dive further into policy development in the comprehensive plan, and it'll give further definition to that. And then also the growth rate would obviously have an influence on the comprehensive plan and the need for an urban growth boundary expansion. So tonight, again, really kind of the focal points is the employment forecast scenarios, looking at those, and the economic development objectives and the discussion around those. Just for informational purposes, these are the folks that were on the advisory committee. We did not include staff on this, but these are the folks that were involved in the advisory committee for reviewing the economic opportunity analysis. And as I mentioned, there were many work sessions. There were also 2 surveys that were included, 2 public surveys, and there was at least 1 open house. So jumping right into the employment scenarios, and if you have questions regarding these, Todd is available as well. I'm going to kind of do a high level of these. So with all the input we received from the advisory committee, their recommendation was really the medium growth scenario, and I'll touch on the 2 others in a moment. But the medium, primarily because it's consistent with what's happened over the last 11 years in terms of a growth rate. So if you look at that growth rate and you project that out, that really is where the medium growth rate comes in. No worries. And so that really is a reflection of if we are going to hold the same course that we have seen in the city, going forward, that would be the medium growth rate. The low growth scenario would be actually half of the growth that we received over the medium growth rate. And then the high growth rate is slightly more than the medium growth rate. I'm probably oversimplifying this, but essentially those are the 3 scenarios. So kind of what does this mean in acreage and acreage demands? These are the boxes that are circled in the red. We're looking at the medium growth rate, and so essentially for industrial, there would be a need of about 438 acres of land in addition to what the city already has to maintain that level of land that would allow for future industrial activities, and about 8 acres of commercial land. And again, these are looking at based on the last 11 years and forecasting those forward. You can see the low growth rate is substantially less than that at 4 and 81. And again, that's half as much of considering what has happened historically. And then the high growth rate, you can see on that is roughly about 46 acres more on the industrial side and about 9 acres more on the commercial side. Let me stop there. Do you have questions or anything? Maybe take a pause here before I'm kind of going forward.
Questions? Go ahead.
I'm noticing how close the medium and high estimates are. That mainly has a difference in the type of businesses that we're seeking out or would be expecting to seek out as opposed to. It's just you look at the low, medium, and high, and the medium and high acreages are very close to each other. And I'm assuming that you're just looking at more higher quality of employment as opposed to a much greater need for land.
And I can answer part of that, but I would like to turn it over to the expert here, to Todd Chase.
I'll just say the Oregon allows cities to assume a strategic growth scenario with respect to job growth. You need to have a pretty clear and objective idea of what types of industries you're hoping to attract with that strategic job growth scenario. So in this high growth scenario, it's basically assuming we're going to keep at least 3 additional large industrial sites available for future strategic employers over and above what we would justify with the medium growth, just based on the trends. So it's very strategic in the types of large lot industrial you might want to seek as a city. And then in addition to that, there's all the spin-off benefits and, business to business suppliers for those larger industrial users. And that would spin off additional commercial job growth.
And Todd, I think one thing on this, looking at these scenarios is, do you have any thoughts on DLCD's commentaries about medium versus high and the support that they would have for those scenarios?
Yeah, certainly the scrutiny is higher with the higher demand scenarios. The safe harbor is the low one, and that would not really be subject to any challenge. And the medium one, I think, as a city, we could justify and defend based on past history pretty easily. So that will be scrutinized during the implementation of any UGB amendment associated with this. But the high is going to be very difficult much more difficult to defend than the medium.
Thank you, Todd. Any other questions? And you can have it later, we can circle back as well. So continuing on the economic development objectives, and these are the ones that have been identified by the advisory group, as well as really consistent, we believe, with the information that we've received through both work session and surveys and open house commentary. These are reflective of those, we believe, but these are ones that we want to kind of go through one by one, and if there's questions or commentary or adjustments or additions, we'd like to have those to be able to take forward to the council. So the first one is enhance Canby's positive business environment with adequate commercial, industrial, and mixed-use sites to address future growth opportunities. 2 is to plan for industrial expansion east and north of Molino Road. 3, retain and attract businesses that provide quality jobs with high levels of employment per acre. 4, provide incentives for targeted job creation and major private investment. 5, support expansion in health services. 6, support workforce training and development. 7, expand opportunities for development of workforce housing. 8 is expand lodging options. 9 is fund roads and infrastructure using innovative techniques. 10, support arts and visitation, including agri and bicycle tourism. 11, attract downtown redevelopment with integrated mixed-use buildings. 12, update design standards and provide incentives for building and renovations. And 13, think global, regional, and act local with respect to community development. So just kind of going back to these, if there are commentary on these items, we'd be happy to discuss those at your convenience.
Can I?
Go ahead.
So is this a sort of high level, these bullet points?
They are, I mean, I think they do support the whole notion, I think, really of the medium growth objectives that really is what is being recommended. And I think they serve really a broad brush of trying to provide employment that both is, I think, needed and desired, but also I think part of this, for example, the high level that you're talking about, let me just give one example. So number 3, in part of this, I went into more detail on this in the staff report, but what does that mean? The employment per acre. And so aspirationally, that was being looked at as provide at least 8 jobs per acre. So what we have now is in our current code is 3 jobs per acre. So I could see a broad discussion during the comprehensive plan process and acknowledgement of further defining what that is, and then that I could see that further being defined in our code for light and heavy industrial.
I guess that's my point. So every one of these bullet points, we're going to get into the woods on each one of these, right?
The comprehensive plan process will get into that level. This sets the framework for that, really, essentially. So the 2 decisions are these objectives the right ones to go forward and drill down, to your point? And the second one on this is the medium growth scenario appropriate for moving that forward as well into the comprehensive plan, which will end up having policy discussion for the entire community. But there's an advisory group. That group is actually going to be starting their work on April 13th. So that's something coming up very soon. And there'll be a discussion there, but obviously the public as a whole, and there'll be many, many opportunities for people to get more involved with this. But yes, these would set the stage for future possible implementation. It would be both in the type of zoning. So let's say, for example, if land got brought into the city, well, is the current light industrial and heavy industrial zone adequate, or should there be other zones added to that, other industrial zones, or should we modify those zones to be more reflective of these aspirational objectives?
So on the next page that you had,
Yep.
So I read the bigger report that you had. So expand lodging options. Can we say expand lodging? I'd love to see, again, hotel, convention center, utilizing the fairgrounds. I noticed in the overall report, it was suggested there along 990. I just think, being able to connect downtown to the industrial park with something like a fairgrounds, convention center, hotel, it's all about tourism to keep this downtown. Because you're going to go out east, and as you go out east and north, you're going to have pockets of development to handle those. You're going to lose the ability. There's going to be nothing for people to come back downtown for. This downtown will die harder than ever before in the next 20 years. So there's got to be a reason to bring people back down here, to bring that growth back here. And I just think that's an incredible opportunity, and I at least want to have the chance to argue it.
And I think it's inclusive, absolutely could be, and I think those options could be exactly what you're talking about. I think some of that, as that conversation continues, would be in light of more the implementation pieces of that, which the economic opportunity analysis kind of sets the stage for it, but it doesn't really fulfill it because it's something that's going to require more conversation. But I think that's completely consistent with that objective.
Hutchinson, anything?
Not at this point, no, thank you.
I think that one of the things, a couple of the things that I'm seeing that we might be missing here a little bit is more of the high-tech type stuff. I think we really need to probably, I know Wilsonville's heavy on it and Hillsborough and whatnot. I don't see why we can't have a piece of the pie here and be looking at that. Whether it be EVs or, we've got a battery plant here in town. Would that plant, I know it's aged, but possibly that plant could be moved into our industrial park and could be converted into more of an EV type of a thing. I think that's part of the way our world is headed is that way. So the technology that I think we would be remiss if we didn't look at the ag type of things. I know that there's we've got a lot of ag land around us, and supporting that from the standpoint, we've got the pump folks here, but nothing says that we couldn't get into. I know in Donald there's a company that specializes in very ag specific specialty type equipment. We could have something like here we kind of support the ag stuff that we have going on around us. And then I wouldn't mind seeing, and I don't know what the possibility is, I know that they have extensions there, but higher education as far as community colleges, satellite college locations, I think would be very healthy for our community, giving people a local option for continuing ed classes and so on and so forth. So that would be, if I were going to add anything to this list, that's probably where I would look. And then number 9, it says fund roads and infrastructure using innovative techniques. I'd like to know more about that. That's really critical to our growth here. If we can't get around, we're gonna die. And so I think that's really important. Maybe working with the county as far as and the state as far as getting a radius road program developed for us. I know we'll be touching with this on our TSP, but like I said, if we can't get around, we're doomed, in my opinion. So those are the
all great points. And I was just going to ask Todd, and again, I know this may not relate to the radius road, but just in general, Todd, thoughts on innovative techniques for infrastructure that financially.
Yeah, and again, this is, as Don said, this is a framework in which to build upon as you move forward. And certainly infrastructure financing funding came across through both the public input surveys and the advisory committee input we received along the way. And, in some communities, of course, we're looking at, and you've done this in Pioneer Industrial Park, urban renewal for major infrastructure, getting ahead of the development investment using urban renewal. Other communities, Wilsonville has been very progressive in terms of using transportation utility fees that are range in cost depending on the type of industrial or non-industrial user or business that's considering locating in Canby. So for example, a distribution company wouldn't pay the same as a food processing company, because a distribution company has much more roadway impact. So, you can size your fees accordingly, and therefore those fees can become carrots or sticks with respect to the type of industries you're trying to attract. And so those are a couple of ideas for innovative techniques.
So I guess my point, thank you. I think my point would be on number 9, that we expand that just a little bit to just say that, and I hope, I don't know if everybody else is on board with this, but coming from the Planning Commission, we're making a recommendation. I think that radius road system is critical. How we fund it, how that works, we can get into the nuts and bolts in that, but I think that is, we've got to do something different than just 99E.
And I would say too on that number 9, I mean, I would think we need to incorporate at this point, looking at the entire town again, because there was a plan in place for the first round. And it didn't quite happen, but it needs to be addressed big time. Especially if you start adding more people, more stuff out there. That's going to incorporate the whole town at this point.
Good points. And so I think I think on I think the 9 was kind of really more what Todd was talking about, perhaps on like the funding source, but I think, and the need that you guys are talking about is part, obviously with the need, you have to have the funding. So I think they're interrelated, obviously, and I think that urban renewal is a pretty big topic for discussion that will be important for the council.
Yeah, and that funding, so urban renewal is one, but that urban renewal didn't do that much out there. I mean, AFDs, there was a lot of different mechanisms that need to be brought in here, and how there's a lot to talk about here. So we don't get in the pickle we were in the first round.
Gotcha. So noted. I did want to, I want to give Commissioner Juros a chance to speak. So why don't we start with her and we'll continue. Go ahead.
I don't have anything. Thank you.
And then, Commissioner, I was going to go back to the high-tech piece momentarily, because I do think there is value in that discussion. I know you mentioned that an agricultural product, kind of specifics related to that, perhaps. I don't know if that's biotech, but there's a huge range, both in terms of product or manufacturing, but there's also biotech, and other communities have dealt with that. I know that at least in terms of the Metro scan, part of the challenge for this community is that we simply have not had the acreage. And so there have been studies that have been done, and they're marketing kind of this corridor along 205, and I think they were looking for 50 acres or larger pieces of land that were like available, ready to go, or even larger than that. I don't know the exact size, but I think that does play into future zoning, and it does play into like what aspirationally that would be. And I think the challenge on some of these is some of those sectors have kind of obviously formed. You see those in kind of the Hillsborough area, and they're synergies, but it does, I think we already have some of that here, and I think that's a good discussion as we move that into the future discussions. But I think a big part of that is the first lens on many of these companies is the acreage there or not, and that's kind of the challenge. I mean, right now, because we've kind of been passed by in some ways because we just don't have it. And so that's part of that discussion.
No, I agree. And I think we should. Hillsborough just annexed how many acres for that new data center that they're putting in there?
Yeah, and that's all kind of interrelates, and there's this kind of regional, and part of the folks, one of the people on the advisory board was from the county, and obviously very cued into that, and she's been super helpful on discussions about, and so stuff comes through, and it's like, well, we really don't have anything that matches that. But there, I mean, again, these industries may or may not land here, but they start really high level, and then that from there is like, okay, do you meet our minimum requirements? And then from there it kind of drills down.
Yeah, and the thing that
Yeah.
I think with the high tech is, and this is, in my head, this is the way I look at it, you look at something like a data center, you're going to employ people, but you're not going to have the big truck traffic demand that you're going to have with a bottling distribution center. I just use that for example, or a steel manufacturing company or things of that nature. It would be really great to get into some of this high-tech stuff that isn't putting a demand on so much of our transportation system and everything else. Now, I realize that there's resources as far as power and whatnot is concerned, but I really think we'd be missing the boat at this particular stage in the game if we don't explore that.
And agreed. The one thing it's kind of like narrowing down what that is. I mean, would there be things that would not be in that wish list of, I mean, is it all high tech, or is it, I mean, because data centers to something that's assembly and manufacturing, those are different things.
I think you can go back. So what were we in? Phase 3, phase 2. I guess we were in phase 2, but phase 1, 2, and 3. 2 and 3, when you look back at that, it had heavy industrial in it, and it was defined, so it kept certain things out. Honestly, you could take that playbook in that first industrial park, especially phase 2 and 3. Another thing, I guess, I'm not sure how I'd even word this, but included in this, one of the things you say is attract downtown redevelopment. But we also need to attract and welcome our business community in. And we didn't do that in the first round, believe me. We're still paying the price for that. When we shut down Millgard, we are still paying that price. And that's a whole nother discussion to have. But it would be nice to see it attract downtown redevelopment, but how are we going to promote commercial, industrial? It'd be nice to see, and I think that's a broader plan that, the city needs to show the business community that we're darn serious. And that's what attracts better users to your town. And that, all I can say is you'd had more, you look at Columbia Distributing, there's enough room on there for them to put their corporate offices there, but notice they're not there. And that's a whole nother discussion, but we don't want that. We want those high-paying jobs coming with that. I don't know if that makes sense.
No, it does. And I think, obviously, an environment that is promoting the desired business types is critical. And I think there's many elements. I don't think it's contrarian to have the downtown and exterior both working with, together in terms of, I think they absolutely do mix and complement each other. And I think we're seeing the beginnings of things. Now the Planning Commission was very involved in the food cart thing, and you're going to start to see that in large quantity in this community. I mean, it's pent up, and I think, not to say that's a direct parallel, but I think part of that is that starts to create a different dynamic and an attractor, and that's, I think, what you're speaking about is in how do you create the attractor and be attractive to both downtown and to the industrial park.
Yeah, one thing I've learned in the last few years is activity breeds activity, and my understanding with those food carts, it starts breeding better activity out of those. I think it's a great start.
Any other discussion?
So we were talking about maybe some things we would like not to be here.
Yes,
Not in my backyard, is that the topic?
Well, I would be interested. I mean, it's difficult because when you talk about industry, it's like, well, I didn't mean this.
Right.
It's like, what did you mean? Because when you get to zoning, you can't really say, well, sorry, we're going to exclude you, but you can have a use category, but you can't be like, well, we really don't like you, and you're just like this other thing, but you can't do that in zoning. It just, Yeah.
But you can start at that first part.
Yeah.
We went through, I mean, we hashed the hell out of this thing.
Yeah.
I think anything that might get them in trouble with the EPA is something to avoid, but they probably would anyway. Things like more mining or more ditch digging or asphalt plants or, I don't know, things like that.
Lands, gravel pits.
CBD processing. I can think of all the things my neighbors complain about. Smelly things.
Smelly.
I think the employees per acre is key. Because one of the things that with data centers is you end up hiring a lot of like HVAC techs, but they don't stay there. They generally fly in from out of the area. There's a friend of mine who manages data for Kaiser, and he moved to the beach, and it's been horrible for his personal life, but his professional life has gone off gangbusters because he just stays inside during the rain and works. But he's not hanging out in that community. He's not patronizing the other businesses. He's not around them. We start getting into some of the more light manufacturing and assembly things. I think that's going to be a little bit more to our taste. We have a limited amount of expansion zone of unclaimed lands in the urban reserve, I guess we call it. And so I think our capabilities of being able to float large parcels of land to attract, a manufacturer or whole cloth is going to be limited just because of the parcel sizes. And so if we can find ways to get, businesses that are more compact and more technically sweet than, say, a steel yard or a warehouse, those things are great for paying per square foot, but as far as enhancing our community, I think they're a little lackluster.
And I am definitely not the person to speak to this. Somebody like Jamie would probably be better at it, but I read all of this stuff going on about the chip manufacturers and how they're building all these big chip plants. Now, obviously, we probably don't have the area to put in a chip plant, but we might be able to have area enough to build something that's supporting that. I don't even know what goes into a chip, but they got to have stuff that goes into a chip, right? A lot of and so maybe
Power supplies.
yeah.
Everything around the chip.
Yeah, there you go. And so it's I think that would probably be. I just think that the whole thing, and then we also talk about the medical thing. I forget what number that was. I can't see it on that. Maybe it was the other page, but when it says
number 5.
Board expansion.
number 5, it's into health services. What does that mean? Does that mean doctors' offices, or does that mean somebody making N95 masks or whatever? Well, health services is a really broad thing, but for in our industrial area, being married to a surgical nurse, man, they went through supplies like there was no tomorrow. So maybe that would be, as far as health services are concerned, something that we would expand that, not just health services. The first thing I thought of was more doctors' offices, and I thought, well, that's cool. We need doctors to buy all these expensive houses that we've got in town. So, but on the other hand, maybe health services would be the support services for the health industry. That I think that is going to be a huge market moving forward. So.
And I think, Todd, thoughts on that? Because I think you might have some thoughts on that.
Well, I know that you do have in your community, what's the firm that does the assisted living centers in your
Hope Village.
Yeah, Hope Village.
Well, no, the headquarters operation.
Marquee.
Yeah.
Yeah, marquee companies, and I do think that those jobs are important. It's hard to build an economy around those service jobs, but I do think there are some destination medical procedures that people people need, and Alzheimer care units and all types of outpatient medical clinics that are specialized. And I think Canby would be a great location for that.
And, to that point, I think part of it is just on the healthcare side, obviously, we're not keeping up with the whole need for assisted living. I mean, that's another aspect of this, but just simply that's a huge pent-up demand. I mean, I think that's unfulfilled. But I mean, so what Todd said, and I think just locally, I mean, we know there's a significant demand there.
I'd like to go back to this employee per acre. When we put that overlay zone on the industrial park, which took months, by the way, how they ever got that lifted is beyond me. But 12 employees per acre is what we had, and that was too many. And there's reasons for that. But 8 to 10 is really more reasonable. But it's important to stick to that. You don't want in your industrial park, you're trying to offset the tax base. You're trying to get good jobs here. Storage units and apartment complexes on rail, we've got to keep that from happening again. I don't know how that took an act of Congress to change that.
And I think in terms of going forward, that is a sizable discussion, and I would believe one that will come up soon in terms of the comp plan process is revisiting that. I think it's challenging to hit the right number exactly, but I would agree personally that I think the current number is low. And I think that, to the points made earlier, I do think that's a determining factor. I think, the two things that can be looked at is employees per acre, and then kind of what character we're trying to create in the industrial park, which is some of that character is based on code standards, and what are we trying to achieve there. And I mean, there could be a place for many different types of employment, and but they look different. I mean, I think does it look more business park, or is it something that looks more distribution, for example?
And what is the employee per acre right now in the
3.
industry? So that overlay zone is just completely gone.
And I don't know how that got there either, because it was a lot higher.
Yeah, it was 12.
Yeah.
Just like they threw out that whole overlay. Other than that employee per acre, that overlay zone, I mean, the property owners, everybody worked on that for months.
It's kind of in the past.
It's just sad when that thing left. I didn't even know they could do that.
Yeah, and it was prior. Yeah, I mean,
But
this
it's
is
a lot of work
this
when
is
you
why
do
we're
that.
talking. I mean,
Throw it out.
to revisit this whole thing. I mean, it's a lens to revisit, and maybe both existing land in the city and then urban growth areas in the city, as well as urban growth expansion. This whole thing is being reevaluated. So.
I think the idea at the time was that they just weren't seeing the action out there, and the employees per acre was seen as the impediment. In hindsight, I wasn't there at the time when they changed it, but looking at things now, I think it was more a matter of there was industrial land available closer to major arterials, and closer to the center of the metropolitan area, and that was all gone. And then attention turned towards us, and we just happened to lose patience at the time. I think one of the things that's important to understand is to codify, like what you're saying, is to maintain the character of our community by not allowing development when it ceases to meet our criteria. We are preserving that. We gain by denial at that point, because what we're doing is we're sticking to our line, and we're saying we are not going to have these kinds of businesses in our community, and we think that's important for our character, and it is not a loss for us to deny them, because we are saving a value to us. And so I think a lot of times people start looking at growth as that when you don't get it, you're losing somehow. But I think it's pretty clear with our discussions with the community that there are things about Canby they want to save, and when you have large expanses of industrial landscape without any people on them, that creates character. And, we need to decide whether that's what we want or not. And if we decide that that's not what we want, we need to stick to it. And to do that, we need to make sure that when we write our laws, that there's a little bit of an education in them for the people, because it's not going to be us who test all of the things that we pass. It's going to be someone who we've handed the torch to, and if they don't understand our reasons for drawing the line where we did and what we stand to lose by that, then they will just choose what's best short-term for them.
And I just want to be clear here. The only reason that part took so long to take off, it's just important, in the property owners, the businesses out there, the developers will back me up 150%. It's because it's a long story. I have it on video, believe it or not. But when you promise, when a body promises an owner something and then goes against it, you send a very bad vibe out to your business community. And that's what happened with Milgard. And we are still paying the price today, and that's why your park took so long to take off, because the business community ran. So if we're going to do this and promote this thing, and this is the industrial park, and he's right. I mean, we talked about this. We need the educational piece. 20 years from now, we can't have people saying, "Oh, that wasn't ours. That's yours," because that's what happens. And so, I just want to be very clear that when that happens, and then you screw around with the business community, they will run, and that has happened to us. I mean, we're still paying that price.
Okay, anything?
I guess just one more thing on the employee per acre, just so we can beat it to death. But we had an application last year, and everyone in this group had a lot of hand-wringing about it, as you recall. We all agreed it's not the right thing. We need to change it. So we're all in agreement about that at this group. And I wonder, as we think about expanding the growth boundary, what is the state going to think about expanding that with a low number per acre? And do they have a sweet spot somewhere? Is there one to say, well, if you're going to add 300 acres, then you have to have this minimum? I don't know. Can they do that? Do they have a suggestion? Is there a number out there? I'm just curious.
Excellent question. And Todd is in the crosshairs of this discussion with the LCD right
I
now.
haven't heard of a sweet spot for that from the state's perspective yet, but it does seem like the actual jobs per acre is getting harder to measure now that people are working part-time at home, and a lot of employers are using contract workers as opposed to, full in-house staff. So it's becoming a harder thing to measure.
And we saw that in an application last year. There was some smoke and mirrors, and we couldn't tell. It's impossible. Anyway, thank you.
Is that true in industrial too? I mean,
Yes, that's the one we're talking about.
Because you can't really be at home with industrial, can you?
Yeah, you have trucks that go back and forth.
Where do the truck drivers
Yeah,
reside?
you remember.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I think the DLCD is obviously involved with this process. Ironically, they are kind of more focused on residential because that has a lot more really parameters around it in the state. Employment does have parameters, but largely, or more largely, I would say, is up to the cities to determine what that is. What is your future? What is your employment base? It has to be reasonable. You can't ask for the world. And I think FCS has done a good job of trying to, deal with this in the realm of state requirements and looking at things. And I think part of that is, as we move forward, we're trying to get a sense, and there's a visioning process that will happen as part of our comprehensive plan. Obviously, employment's part of that visioning process. This all leads to code updates eventually. That's not years from now, but that's stuff that will end up having to be implemented. So that's why we're doing this, is to get more detail, and then hopefully with that and the education, back to the point about we are trying to control our future, but also maintain our livability and also have jobs here for people that would be able to work here and live here. That all comes together more cohesively than I think what we currently have now, which is somewhat reactionary in terms of people's perception about, oh my God, there's this giant business coming in or not, but more about, well, let's talk about that. Well, where are we going? That's why we're having the conversation.
Thank you.
So, do you want us to go through these each items and,
I've taken good, I mean, I would say that really, I think I can take this forward to council, and what I'm going to do is we will clearly, Jamie Stickle and I will clearly articulate what we've heard here, but if there is something that you want to give a specific like item and wordsmith it tonight, that's great. I think some of the commentary that's been received is, I believe, captured in the objectives. I would say that the targeting, I think, is important that is mentioned here. Like, for example, the use of urban renewal funds for innovative techniques for roads and the road system, I think, is one that is important. I mean, not all the comments are important, but that one is one I think council should, because they are in the midst of that discussion. I think that's a really important one. It's timely. I think the type of industry, as we get into that discussion, is going to be more probably the comprehensive plan part of this. But obviously, I think what you're saying as commissioners, the council will also be agreeing with. I think that the other comments, I think as we get more into this discussion, I think the employees per acre is a clear item, and then what do we want the industrial areas to look like? I think those are all, there's probably more to what you've said, and also hotel convention center. I think that's clearly in the mix. I think that clearly is something, whether it's a hotel convention center, sports complex / sports complex, or whatever that looks like, I think that's clearly something really important to this community, because we're losing a large amount of money by not having a hotel in this community. I mean, that's point blank, and I think that's a limiter for the city.
okay. Anything else that anybody's got an issue that, because this is moving on to the city council.
It will be, yes, and so, yeah.
If you've got anything, okay, continue on, Don.
So I just, in moving this forward, that really kind of brings us to like a close here, and we've already kind of covered the discussion, and I'm really looking for a motion by the Planning Commission to move this forward with your comments that we will reflect in our staff report going forward with this, and then we'll have council weigh in, and then that council discussion could end up resulting in, okay, well, we will wordsmith those items, or we'll just note those as being important. That'll then carry forward in the comp plan discussions that we'll be having, and then policy development.
Is anyone thinking about anything other than the medium growth projection? I don't think anybody involved in this process is looking at anything else.
I'm not sure the city can handle a high one.
Yeah,
It's hard.
I mean,
those are enough with a low one.
yeah. Well, it'd be nice if it happened by accident, bad problem, good problem.
Depends on how much more that comes out of Portland, but I mean,
Yeah.
if we had the land, it'd be gone, I think.
But, I mean, I think with the discussion points that he wants to bring forward, that pushing forward the middle estimate for city council is where we should go.
And I think the mayor suggested this, but I'd like to have more joint meetings with them on all this.
And that'll be in the works as well. I mean, there's a lot of moving pieces to many, many things we're doing right now, and I feel it's really instrumental and important. I feel like part of this discussion tonight is not so overwhelming because we have had work sessions, and I think that's helped kind of address a lot of these issues. We've had open houses around this. Really, we're trying to get the word, I mean, even more spread out and get more input. There's a public input element to the comprehensive plan. That's a group that specializes in that. So the goal really is to build on that, and then also have the Planning Commission and council discussions with a broader segment of the community involved in those as well.
I thought it was interesting. I just read kind of a sidebar note, an article day before yesterday about the city of Portland, and they said that this amazed me, that they're experiencing now greater industrial growth than they have in the last 20 years.
There's no way, they're all leaving.
Well, that's what I thought too, but that was, this whole article went on. And then I drove down Columbia Boulevard, which, that used to be the yellow iron mecca of the world. And my gosh, Halton Tractor's gone, John Deere's gone, and they've leveled it and put in warehouses, and they're continuing to do that. So I thought, after reading that article and seeing that, I thought, if everybody's leaving Portland, obviously the industrial piece of it is not leaving Portland. So I don't know, and I think we should have a piece of that pie. So I will entertain a motion. We're to a point now to where what our discussion will be moved on to the city council. So we'll entertain a motion.
Mr. Chair,
Yes.
I make a motion that we move forward with this, what do we call it?
Economic opportunity analysis.
Yeah, the EOA with our comments that the plan director is taking down towards the city council.
Been moved. Do I have a second?
Do we want to also put, I think we're supposed to choose low, medium, or high also as part of our
Yeah,
recommendation?
and that would,
Okay,
I
I
think,
was under the impression that we had chose as submitted.
and I think you
Okay.
can embody that as recommended.
Yep.
Okay, I will second.
Okay. Been moved and seconded. Any discussion? Hearing no discussion. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Those opposed? Pass 4-0. We'll look forward to your comments at the city council.
Okay. Thank you. And ready to move on to the next item.
Okay, very
Thank
good.
you. Take care.
Thank you,
Todd,
Todd.
thank
We
you.
appreciate you being here.
Thank you, Todd.
Take-
So we have now moved on to item 6 on our agenda, items of interest, report from the planning staff. Take it away again, Don.
Just continuing on and the discussions on items that are coming up. So there's the next planning commission is April 10. And again, I think speaking of a continued discussion, this is not going to be a joint session, but this obviously will be the planning commission by itself. I'd like to continue the discussions on the comprehensive plan and housing and sequential comprehensive plan processes that we're going through. There's many elements to this. Guidance from DLCD is, I wouldn't say it's evolving, but it's changed from the last 2 years, and some of that is directed through the governor's office, and I don't mean to say that in a scary way at all, but just in terms of kind of what that means going forward and just knowing where things are kind of headed. And we took a pause on the housing production strategy and housing needs analysis, and that was a good thing because more information as it's coming forward is identifying that those strategies are expected to all be implemented versus being aspirational. So that's important. And it also is giving us a time to evaluate more of the buildable lands analysis for the city and kind of where we are at this point. So I think those are good things. It's also helpful to have that piece understood better, I think, as we go into the comprehensive plan process and the sequencing of that. So on April 10, I'd like to talk more about that. How does the housing piece kind of integrate more into the comprehensive plan? And then also we are looking at doing a sequential comprehensive plan adoption. Malala is doing that. They're the first in the state to do that. We would be the second, I'm believing. And it's a process that gives us the ability to kind of stagger the urban growth boundary expansion piece from the housing needs piece, which I think will be important given the aggressive timeline that we're putting many elements forward all at once. And then one piece that the Planning Commission will clearly be involved with is what we're calling efficiency measures. We've talked about those, which are code items for the housing needs analysis that address the city's efforts to limit the need for an urban growth boundary expansion for residential. And those 3 items that we're planning to work with the Planning Commission are going to be cottage developments, planned unit development update, and mixed use development along 99E. So those 3 are moving forward. We're not quite there yet, but I will give you real examples. And I know there's been commentary and we're taking notes about trying to give examples. And first of all, we'd like to frame it up in terms of what other examples are in similar communities. what you've seen in this community and others, and then talking through and trying to frame that up, and then also try to target based on what is the purpose of our focus is in terms of the cross section of what we're trying to achieve in terms of housing costs, and what does that mean to do something that's a cottage development. It's still going to be expensive. It's not cheap. None of this is cheap, and but it's less challenging for families in this community to afford. I think there's a huge issue here about if there's not anything done to kind of course correct, families just won't live here. I mean, they just won't be able to afford to be in this community, and so the schools will have an impact, and that's something I believe we would like to avoid, is to still to maintain really desirably and diversified kind of a demographic here. I think is important. And it fits in with everything else we're doing. But just kind of an overarching discussion on April 10. We have some hearing items that are kind of staggered a little bit. They're not quite ready for prime time, and those are probably coming late April, May. Those are items on the horizon. Mixed in with all the stuff that we're doing with the comp plan is a number of House bills by the legislature, fairly aggressive House bills that will have interesting challenges for the city. Just to be honest, they will in some ways limit what the city can and cannot do, even though we're not in metro. So that's another item we're tracking as well. Trying to keep ahead of the tsunami, so to speak, of stuff that's happening. That's the goal here, is to be ahead of that curve instead of like behind it, which is hard to stay ahead of it, but there's a lot coming because the state really is. And, it's legitimate. I mean, trying to create more affordability is important, but I think the way it's done, I would like that to be more locally focused than like directed by the state, if we can do that.
Can I ask a question on that? So I guess in looking at this, and you scare me just a little bit from your discussion there. Is there anything, the stuff that you say is coming down the pike, is there any of it that is, if we had codes on the books before it actually goes into play, that would be grandfathered in because we had it in the books before? Is there any chance that we could maybe do a little bit of disaster preparedness there?
Some thoughts on that. I think more importantly than grandfathering, which we probably will not get away with in terms of like, hey, we beat you guys to the punch here, but more importantly would be things like, what does it mean to, habitability and words that are undefined, like you can't do these things unless it's for habitability. Well, what is habitability? And I think it's more having our staff internally discuss that between our planning staff and our legal counsel, and like that's where I'd like to go with that discussion, is like, well, this means we have to take a stand on what that means. And for better or for worse, some of the stuff, it's going to get tested, at the state level. We are not the only community facing this. So, and it's not to say that like some of those things shouldn't be discussed anyway, but it's somewhat problematic, I think, to a degree when you have legislation and, it's done, I think, in a good spirit, but, sometimes it has unintended consequences. Yeah. Where you tell a jurisdiction you cannot deny a variance for certain things. That's pretty heavy on a state level to tell a local jurisdiction that. Yeah. And that's part of what we're dealing with now, is trying to, with the exception of for habitability. So, so that's kind of like where we're at this point. So some things we will not be able to completely control, but to the extent that's, again, the tsunami that we're trying to stay ahead of. So.
Well, instead of standing just full on to the gun and getting shot, maybe we could just kind of turn sideways and make the target a little smaller or different. I don't know. Yeah. So anyway, okay, go ahead. Anything else?
So those were the major items. And then just, there was some discussion before we started, but we have some interviews for planning commissioners coming up on Thursday. Chair Ellison will be involved, I'll be involved, the mayor and Councilor Varweg will be involved. So hopefully we'll have more people on the planning commission shortly. I don't have an ETA, but that process is moving forward.
Okay.
So those are the main updates. And as we get like into the other things, I mean, there are a number of hearings. I know you guys are probably like, when am I going to get another hearing item? Well, it's
Losing our touch.
really controversial. But anyway, those are coming. You will get what you want. I mean, I know. Yeah.
All right.
So
Anything else, Don?
that was it.
Okay, I'm going to ask the question, Walnut Street extension, where are we at?
I have some current information because the application is, all the pieces are there. It will be submitted I believe this week. I just coordinated today with DKS, and they're working on behalf of the city. Kermit Cloud and DKS are leading that, and DKS is planning to pick up the check for the permit fees, which were in my drawer. And I said, hey, I've got this. Where's the rest of it at? That was ironically today, and they said we have the rest of it and we'll be coming by to get it. So that submittal should be occurring this week.
So breaking dirt would happen
It's
about the same time that the 99 project starts and Pine and Redwood realignment starts?
It will be likely, and I think it'll be concurrent with a comprehensive plan process update, which I think is, about the best answer I can give you at this point. I mean, it's largely going to be dependent on ODOT and how quickly they review the application. I mean,
I'm real tempted to get my shovel and wheelbarrow out there and just start digging.
I mean, if they had permits, they could probably start it almost immediately, but the problem is you got to go through the ODOT process. And so that
Right.
is, we've been given 12 to 18 months as the forecast for that. So, yeah.
Okay, Judy, anything?
Just a pitch for slide numbers on the slides.
Okay.
It gives me great comfort to know, are we at 4 of 80 or 4 of 10?
They are noted up in the upper right-hand corner.
Right-hand corner, number 11.
Okay.
Now she wants them bigger.
No, I think it'd be great if we could have a standard and have the number of the
Okay.
number.
Okay.
That's the point, is are we on 10 of 100?
Okay.
Or are we on 10 of 50? That's the point, so
Okay.
thank you.
Okay.
That's good, that's actually, I like that. Anything else? Great.
Quick question for Don. Do you see the discussion on the smaller living units? I'm just thinking about what happened with the hotel and McMenamin's property in Clackamas, where they had the potential for creating a low-income housing spot, and then the neighbors said no, and it just put brakes on everything and just stopped it. I'm sure it'll move forward in some way, or maybe it won't. I don't know, but I can't help but notice the knee-jerk of people who assume that when we're talking about lower income than us, then we mean certain things. And I could see it as impeding the conversation. Just like what you were just saying about, what it does to our community as far as young families and for couples starting out and things of that nature. What's your feeling of the conversation at this point?
I think part of this is an educational piece. I think really largely we've been kind of just trying to promote market rate, which is still not cheap, but like diversified product with a market rate less. So, you have a 700 square foot house that's now $350,000 or $300,000. That is not a discounted. I mean, it's still expensive, but could a family, maybe it's 800 square feet or 1,000 square feet, but I think it's an educational piece that part of the housing production strategy and housing needs analysis starts to get to, which is, do we want to be able to attract teachers, policemen in this community that live in this community that make those kinds of salaries, because that's the kind of housing that they can afford. And if it takes $63,000 or whatever to afford a $1,600 a month apartment, it starts to look different. That's probably what a teacher makes. So, I mean, that's the conversation. Yeah.
Thank you.
Anything else? Okay. Don? We good?
That was it. Thank you. Yeah, appreciate it. Look forward to the next conversation.
Okay, very good. We are going to move to adjournment. We would make a motion to adjourn.
I move to adjourn.
Been moved by Judy and
I'll second it.
seconded by Craig to adjourn the meeting. Thank you very much. I probably got to turn on my microphone. Thank you very much, Canby, for those of you who stuck with us, and get involved. We got a lot of meetings coming up that require the citizen involvement. So get out, get involved, and help us out. We don't want to do this all by ourselves. All right? Thank you very much, Canby. Bye-bye.
Thank you.